Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the first workshop in the Revised Scientific Communication Series. It's actually been a really great time working with these wonderful individuals. And we're just going to start by doing a very quick PowerPoints on the program in general. So let me start with that. Hello, my name is Catherine Sedota, and I am kind of the facilitator for these workshops. Diane Schwartz is our lead for this workshop, and we are welcoming Pam Rose and Ellen Goldbaum, who's going to be coming later, to the first installment of the Scientific Communication Workshop, an Introduction to Scientific Communication. I do want to tell you, and I will be putting in the chat our URL for our Core Competency Workshop Series sites. We actually have a lot of workshops on there that are also available in video form. We just finished up two of them. Scientific communication is actually our fourth one. We did a community engagement session and health inequities. And our first installment of responsible conduct of research was yesterday. Scientific communication has 4 workshops within the series. And if you are interested and haven't signed up for them all, please go to the site that I put in the chat, and hopefully you'll want to sign up for more. So we have a lot of workshops in the series, and most of them are in video format as well from past series. So if you're interested in the videos of any of the series, please contact me at cmp9@buffalo.edu, and I'll be happy to share them with you. I also want to tell you that if you attend all 4 workshops for a certain amount of time, obviously you can't stay for only 10-15 minutes, then you can receive a certificate of completion a couple weeks after the series ends for actually coming to all of the series. And also there's a micro-credential available as well in scientific communication. And that's a really great way in order to receive a digital badge to showcase your skills regarding scientific communication. So if you're interested in that, again, please email me, Catherine Sedota, cmp9@buffalo.edu. I will send you the assignment directions and rubrics, and we can create a timeline for actually completion of the work. And there's work associated with it. We'll create that timeline that is flexible and fits your schedule. Finally, there's going to be a survey that I put into the chat a couple times during this workshop. So please try to complete it if you can. And if you can't, I'll be sending it to you a couple times during the next 2 weeks. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And I am going to very quickly just put something in chats, and then I'm going to start Diane's PowerPoint. But Diane, do you want to at least introduce yourself and introduce the series? Great.
And welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see such a good turnout. I'm sure it's the beautiful sunny afternoon in early March that's bringing you all out. In any case, I'm Diane Schwartz. I'm a research associate professor of biomedical informatics at the Jacobs School of Medicine, and I see a few names that ring a bell. Welcome, everyone. I am a biomedical informatician who focuses on public health informatics. And I teach several different courses in that area, as well as a brand new course called Clinical Informatics. And I also teach the introductory. I have a very different kind of career path that got me to informatics because I early on was a medical librarian, and informatics and librarianship, at least in the health sciences, are very strongly connected. And it has given me many wonderful, interesting opportunities to learn and to be involved with students of all levels and of all areas of interest. So, as an introduction, let's get started talking about scientific communication. This workshop promises to make you all capable of being able to communicate clinical and translational research findings that have been developed either here at the UB Jacobs School or anywhere where good quality scientific research is performed. But the goal of this series is to teach you how to get that word out to lay people. Think of your family who you may meet on, once in a while. They say, "So, Diane, what are you up to these days?" "Oh, I'm a biomedical informatician." "You're a what?" good example, because that happens a lot. People have no idea what the field is. And that's become, for me, the fun part, the challenge of being able to communicate to my family members who are not necessarily trained scientists, what I do and why it's important. Next slide, please. So for the learning outcomes, we've set the following objectives. The ability to communicate clinical, and here at the Jacobs School, a very important component of how we look at science is called translational, bringing work done in the laboratory or on the computer, as in my department, into the clinical domain, making things happen from the bench top to the bedside, we frequently say, and being able to share that information to non-scientists. But remember, those non-scientists could be more than just your grandmother or your Aunt Fanny. It could be people who are in a position in government to make important policy decisions regarding science. It also provides a way to explain why scientific research is important and how we at the university contribute to our Buffalo community. Next slide. So I'd like to be succinct. Why do we communicate about science? I think of three key concepts: to inform our audience, to instill an interest, awaken an interest in the field, to help establish why it's important, and to inspire. I've spent many hours working with young people, whether they be elementary school or high school students or entry-level college students, to help inspire them to think about a STEM career. And today, even more than in many other times, being able to inspire people to pursue a scientific career and to be able to communicate that interest and that knowledge is so important. Next slide. So here's a little kind of almost a cartoon. Inform laypersons, instill an appreciation, a curiosity, and an understanding of the science that we're working on, and to inspire particular youngsters. That's kind of one of my pet enjoyable projects. Next slide. So here are the 6 E's of making science understandable to the public. And remember, I'm defining that public in very broad terms. To educate citizens. Knowing about science is so important. It has permeated so many aspects of our everyday life. Think of the pandemic and what it took to help explain to people why it was important to get vaccinated, why this vaccine was safe, why you would protect not only yourself, your family members, your neighbors, your coworkers, to enrich the reputation of our school. It's what we do is that carries so much weight, and we are always functioning as ambassadors to the public. To experience the professional joy and satisfaction, taking pride in what you do and being able to share that pride with others, and to enhance the understanding of why it's important to provide governmental funding for scientific research, and to establish a commitment to equity, to social justice, and scientific literacy. And then finally, in a very personal perspective, to expand your professional reputation, your ability to communicate with people at all different levels and backgrounds and make yourself understandable to those individuals is a very nice accomplishment, and one that we can certainly take a great deal of pride in. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the basic principles of scientific communication. Does anyone know who said a picture is worth 1,000 words? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Because you'll never guess. This is so fantastic. I love it. All right, next slide. The answer is Henrik Ibsen, the Norwegian playwright. Would you believe that? I think that's so great. Okay, next slide. So what does it all mean? And here's not a simple version. Complex ideas can be conveyed in a single still image that will result in a more effective message than a verbal or written document. Think about that. So we go back to a picture is worth 1,000 words. Or is it? Take a look at this picture. I hope somebody in this room can explain that, because I certainly can't. Next slide. And from all people in the world, I would never have predicted that Albert Einstein would have said something as important as this. If you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it well enough yourself. He was a remarkable man. So take another look at this picture and tell me what you think it's saying. Next slide. Anyone know what this is all about? Not even a guess.
Yeah, I find that amusing. It has a title and everything, but it's still difficult to discern.
Right. It's very pretty, isn't it? I wouldn't mind having it hanging on my wall, but it's still hard to understand. But it's actually a depiction of the American Health Information Network. And it was done in 2014, and it's a nationwide depiction. And it's done by the chairman of my department, Peter Elkin, back in 2006. It's really great. I always thought it was remarkable. So thank you, Dr. Elkin. So let's wrap this up. And some of the basic principles of scientific communication include what's commonly known as the KISS principle. And when I first started leading this presentation workshop, I invited a man who's since left UB, Dr. Bruce Troen, who gave me a hard time because I used to say it's the KISS principle. Keep it simple. And then the next word was stupid. And he said, Diane, that's not very nice. You can't say that in public. So I got rid of the stupid, and Bruce was very happy. So now I just say, keep it simple, ... and avoid. And these are the important 4 takeaways. Avoid scientific terminology, avoid jargon, avoid abbreviations. And you see how acronyms is highlighted, dark, bold type, because I hate acronyms. How many times do you go to a scientific lecture and the only way people talk is in acronyms. And if you're not in that exact area of science, you have no idea what he or she is talking about. So these are the principles to enjoy. Next slide, please. And this is kind of a cute little cartoon that kind of reflects and wraps it all up. Next slide. So if your appetite has been whetted, you can get additional training in this area. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and very interestingly, the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at our sister institution, Stony Brook. And Alan Alda was here, now it's probably about 6 years ago, giving one of the special preeminent guest speakers on the North Campus. And I had the wonderful opportunity to meet him before his presentation. And I said to him, Mr. Alda, why did you set up this center at Stony Brook? Why not at UB? And he gave me a really succinct answer. He said, because I live very close to Stony Brook. He lived apparently just a short distance away from the campus. So I said, well, I can't tell you, you're wrong. Next slide, please. And so here's this is a hot link that you'll see the slide set, and you'll get the recording. You can actually go to the AAAS site and learn about their programs. Next slide. So they have done a really interesting analysis of the challenges inherent in communicating science to the public. And they've recognized, have documented that a shockingly low level of scientific literacy exists within the American population. Very sad to think about that. Outreach activities by professionals can be very, very effective. Social media isn't always a bad thing, and it can be used successfully in communicating good information. Writing in your local newspaper, writing an op-ed column. The Buffalo News has always had various special formats for people to just submit an article. and giving public presentations to the Buffalo community. Always remember, dumbing it down is acceptable, and we don't call it dumbing, we call it writing something at a level that most people can understand.
Yep,
Excellent.
plain language.
Plain language, that's the key word, right? And the next slide, please. So the AAAS program is really valuable for teaching you how to distinguish your opinion about scientific facts and findings and turning it into like a story, something that you can make real, make achievable for the average person. So a few other things that they repeat what I said: don't use equations, don't use acronyms, don't use abbreviations, and don't use jargon. Next slide, please. And here's a little bit of information about the course. They present the concept of science to how to formulate presenting science to a non-expert audience using various media, video lectures, all sorts of creative devices. And the nice thing is, if you're a member of ASMB, it only costs $25. It's probably gone up a little bit since then, but it's a long course, 8 weeks long. And I believe everything is online. And I just want to tell you about, and I think this is the last slide, there's a wonderful video that was created by the AMA Foundation. It goes back quite a few years, but its message, its takeaway is timeless. And I suggest you have a handkerchief or a box of tissues handy, because it's a tearjerker. It's called Communicating to Patients with Limited Literacy Skills. And it was produced and created by a primary care physician who at the time was working in Atlanta at Grady Memorial Hospital. And a dear friend of mine knew him very well and had the highest opinion of him. And if you take the time to look at this video, you'll understand why. Is that the last slide? Yep. So my takeaway message: do it, practice it, and have fun with it. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent. And do you want to introduce Pam?
Sure. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce a colleague, a woman I have known for 30 years probably, right, Pam? She's a health science librarian at the Abbott Library at UB, and she is an expert in misinformation, disinformation, all these bad things, but she's a very nice person. How did you get into this kind of work? In any case, I think you'll really enjoy what she has to say. She takes a very unique perspective on this very challenging topic. The floor is yours, Pam.
Thanks so much, Diane. We got the slides up, yes. So just the introductory slide. I'd like you to know that I'm a liaison librarian to the Communicative Disorders and Sciences department here. But one of my major roles is a consumer health librarian. And so Diane's presentation is absolutely on point. I have the challenge of dumbing stuff down every day. And we hate to call it that, but I have to make things palatable to the people from the community who contact me for more information about their diagnoses. So that's one of my major roles. And that's
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Absolutely. And if you don't want to say dumbing it down, please use the words plain language, which is used quite profusely throughout UB and other areas. Plain language is really the way to go. And newspapers even try to use plain language.
It is indeed. Yes. And not offensive. Next slide. Okay, so I'd just like to show this. If you haven't been to Abbott Library in the South Campus, this is our main reading room on the second floor. When you walk in the doors, you wouldn't think this was up here, but this was the original Lockwood Library. And it's also a silent study area, so I always love showing this slide. Go ahead. So today, what we want to do is be able to evaluate a source and recognize misinformation. Hopefully, this will become easier. We want to understand how the scholarly communication cycle and publishing process produces reliable information without having to worry about the source. We want to be able to identify a source's primary, secondary, or tertiary, and tertiary sources are going to be the primary targets of distilling this information down for the public into plain language. I'm also going to expose you to the levels of evidence and how they apply to research, although many of you probably know this as well. And just a quick comment on copyright and fair use, because that does have an impact on what we present to the public. Next slide. First, let's assess our current knowledge and perception. So if you would click on this code and just tell us what words come to mind when you think of misinformation.
And let's see if we can get some results. And Pam, you want to talk about them?
Yes, indeed. Misleading. Absolutely. I love that somebody put in Trump. Propaganda. Absolutely. Those seem to be the top hits. Altered truth, I like very much. Fake information. Absolutely. You've all got a pretty good handle. Bad. Yes. Absolutely.
I even like malicious is there as well.
Yeah.
Because obviously,
Deceiving,
yeah, absolutely.
untrustworthy. Yeah. And that's what we deal with every day. And I like the fact that somebody put disinformation, because we're going to talk about definitions next.
Right.
Okay. Lies.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Misleading is definitely coming through.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, everyone, for
And
sharing.
manipulative. Yes. I love
Yes, absolutely. Pam, I'm going to share now your PowerPoint again.
that. Okay. And we're going to slide 5.
Yes.
Okay. So somebody already correctly put in disinformation. When we're talking about misinformation, there are many organizations that categorize it in this way. So the first category, misinformation, is just that. It's not a communist plot to deceive. It's just something that somebody puts up because they're misinformed, or they've just summarized the information incorrectly. And because of social media, this stuff spreads like wildfire. Popular sources often use a hook in order to get you to read the article, so they're going to sensationalize it a little bit. That in itself becomes misinformation, because it goes back to the source of the actual article, which they're trying to highlight, and then people take the wrong information from it. Next slide. So disinformation is a little bit different. It's obviously misinformation, but it's deliberate. Somebody's fabricated it or manipulated it in order to deceive the public and obscure the truth. And you can see the intersection between falseness and malintent there. Next slide. And so malinformation is a slightly different term, which implies malintent. And it's often sensitive or private information that is deliberately altered or presented out of context. And it's a hidden agenda. Next slide. And this is just, I'm not going to read all of this. You can look at it in the recording. This is just definitions of different kinds of content, different kinds of mis and disinformation. Okay. So we know why misinformation spreads. We're not in the 18th century anymore, 19th century. And social media, like the SARS-CoV-2 virus, it has a hook. And confirmation bias is rampant. We're more and more seeing people in silos that they want to read what confirms what they already believe. It's a comfort level. And that kind of information, misinformation, is deliberately made easy to hear or read, and you're more likely to accept it. It's kind of like reading Cliff's Notes or War and Peace. It appeals to your emotions, and the over 55 audience is particularly susceptible to this. Next slide. So how do we spot it? Well, fake news techniques really are mostly common sense. You got to look at the source. One of the things that you can usually rely on is if it's a .gov, .org, or .edu. .gov maybe not so much now, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Confirmation bias, check your confirmation bias. If you're reading something that fits right in with your beliefs, you might want to say, wait a second. Let me corroborate this with a couple of other sites. The date is very telling. You can look at the author bio and see what credentials they have, and whether or not it's a joke. Obviously, there are some sites that deal in joke and parody. And then finally, if you're really unsure, you can certainly ask the experts. One thing I run into all the time with my consumer health clients is that if it's too good to be true, I'm sorry, I misspelled good, I didn't mean to. there's an example of misinformation right there. But you can ask the experts. I'm sorry, let me get back to that thought. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So I get people coming to me saying, oh, I saw a cure for tinnitus. There is no cure for tinnitus. And so these people are quacks in many ways. They're trying to sell a product, and they will present a video that says, oh, you have to watch this to the very end. And all along the way, the picture is worth 1,000 words that Diane mentioned is so true, because they will show you happy scenes of people on the beach and scenes of authoritative doctors with white coats and labels. One video I vetted in that regard, I did a little bit of reverse image searching and found that the alleged doctor of otolaryngology was actually a Canadian actor. So that tells you how this was formulated. Okay, next slide. Now, is it new? No, it's not. And if you look at this picture and the photo on the right, you may have seen this photo of Lincoln with this image. That was actually discovered in 1970, that it was actually a fake. Lincoln's head was put onto John C. Calhoun's, ironically, body. He was the antithesis of Lincoln in many ways. And the people who were studying this discovered that his mole was on the wrong side. They not only, if you look at the $5 bill, his face is facing the opposite way, but they reversed it, and then his mole ended up on the wrong side. So this is not new. People have been trying to use disinformation for a long time. This was actually a benign reason. They were trying to find a good image, presidential image of Lincoln after he died, and there weren't any. And so that's the solution this portrait painter came up with. Next slide. So when you're countering misinformation, as you're formulating your message to get out there and you're doing your research, you want to, sometimes you're going to need to go and use a fact checker from one of these sites. I think we all know about Snopes. This is a fairly good site for health misinformation in particular. The Harvard School of Public Health notes that accurate articles, even if they're evidence-based, can contain misinformation. And they also, these lessons also reference predatory journals, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And not many people know about this, but the UB Media Forensics Lab is developing, it's already, kind of in beta testing, a deep fakeometer, and it's being used to detect fake AI images. Many of you may have seen AI images that show humans with 6 fingers, because AI doesn't know about that, right? They don't really know that humans have 5 fingers. So I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Next slide. So again, there are a lot of people studying this. The National Academies have certainly put out a very voluminous report. Their complex recommendations include things that are going to take time: invest in high quality science and medical reporting, strengthening community-based organizations, investing in gathering evidence on social media platforms. And this is already being done. As communicators yourselves individually, if we can carefully vet and verify our sources and offer rebuttals where appropriate and deliver a clean message, so to speak, an accurate message, we can combat this one at a time. And that's the best we can do for now. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. The scholarly communications cycle, which many of you are already involved in, really is how we get to peer-reviewed information. And that's because the peer review process is is embedded in the process. So you get an idea, you're studying something, you see a gap in the knowledge after you've read and reviewed the literature, you design your experiment, you build upon research, you write about it, and you send it into your journal. Then the peer review process takes over. And so your information is vetted, and as much as humanly possible, bias is, reduced, and they suggest changes, and it becomes a better article, and it gets published, and then it gets indexed in many of the databases. Next slide. As a researcher, I always like to plug in for an ORCID ID. If you don't already have one, I highly recommend that you go to this site. If you could throw that in chat, Catherine, the ORCID ID URL.
I will do so as soon as I'm done. I can't get to chat until.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So that'll be available for you. It's basically a DOI for humans. Many of you know DOI is the Digital Object Identifier, which is a unique fingerprint for each article that's published. This is a human unique fingerprint for your research. It follows your research, not your name variables, particularly valuable for women who may change their names if they become married. But anybody really, because if you have a complex name and with several middle names and initials, it's not always going to be the same in your publications. And when you go to that platform, you'll find that NIH uses ORCID IDs. And in fact, I use mine to sign in to the NIH site. Next slide. Now, I mentioned predatory journals before, and not many people really know about this. So the open access publishing model, legitimate journals charge author or article processing fees to authors, which helps them recoup some, some financial gain in lieu of selling subscriptions. However, predatory journals take advantage of that. So they will send something out, say there's an article processing charge, the title looks legitimate, and they prey on that because let's say the legitimate journal that does peer reviewing is the Journal of Ophthalmology. Well, the predatory company will create a new journal, Journal of Clinical Ophthalmology, and it looks very valid. But in fact, they're not doing the peer review. They're taking your money and they're throwing the article out there so it may have inaccuracies and defects in it. We have a guide on the library's website, selecting a publication for your scholarly work, evaluating journals, which can help. We also offer a workshop on that. And that includes a resource called CABLES, Journalistics, Medicine, and Predatory Reports. Now, if you're working on the UB Library's website, you may have seen this little LibKey Nomad thing pop up. Catherine, if you would advance the slide for a moment and then go back. These are called full text plugins, and what they do is they operate in the background. So if we don't have access to it through a subscription, one of these plugins may be able to find you the PDF, and that will pop up automatically, as I said. Previous slide. Again. So we just learned that CABLES is now integrated into LibKey Nomad. So if it's a predatory journal, of which there are over 800, that will pop up on the right side of your screen and it will tell you that. So you can be concerned about the content. There's likely misinformation in there. And so there's another source of it that you can fight and, look for something more valid. Next slide and next slide. Okay. Another source of misinformation are retractions. Many journals are retracted, even peer-reviewed journals. Retraction Watch, that link, tracks these citations. There's a searchable database. A famous example, there was an infamous Lancet paper by Andrew Wakefield that suggested a link between autism and childhood vaccines. No doubt Robert Kennedy is using that particular paper, but it's been retracted. It's still being cited. When you do research, you have to do a thorough literature review, and so these things pop up and they're still being included in research. But you need to be just aware that this exists and look for it. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I spent 2 years volunteering with the World Health Organization, vetting all of the publications that were coming out for inclusion into their COVID-19 database. And we found that there were so many things that were being put out without adequate peer review, even in legitimate journals, because everybody was scrambling to understand this new disease. And so many of those things have currently been retracted, but that's an example of how misinformation got out there and got spread because healthcare providers were desperate. Next. Okay, thank you. So in our current climate, I had to put this slide in and note that there are websites being purged, as we all know. We're even a little bit worried about PubMed being at risk because if something happens and they start suspending input, it'll be static for a while, but we'll see what happens. Meanwhile, there are these alternate resources. Some of you may know about the Internet Archive, which crawls the web regularly and takes snapshots of pages. CDC.gov archive index, people are going and trying to grab those pages before they're taken down. There's also these data rescue projects that you can explore. And our library is in the process of creating a guide that will help identify all of these places where you can get to that data, even though it's not on government sites. And that goes back to .gov is no longer so much of a sure thing in this current climate. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Most of you know what a primary source is. It's the original research. A secondary source might be a meta-analysis or a systematic review that goes and analyzes all that research. It provides a summary, usually at a fairly high level of language, not plain language. But the tertiary sources are the ones that we're trying to, target. And they're the ones that digest and distill information from both of the previous two. Examples are dictionaries, encyclopedias, handbooks, and manuals, but also much of popular press is now a tertiary source. Next. So this just defines more closely what primary research is. Go ahead, next slide. And this is just an example. It's very obvious that this is primary research because the abstract, objective methods, results, and conclusions, experimenter. So it's easily recognized. Secondary research combines the findings, as I said. Clinical practice guidelines, by the way, are considered secondary research. The article or page is going to say review. Next slide. And here's an example. Journal of Acoustical Society of America, it says it's a review, and it says down here, this article presents a scoping review. So boom, that's secondary literature. Next slide. Tertiary research, as we've discussed, is what the public tends to read. And when we talk about plain language, an 8th grade reading level is usually the de facto go-to for structuring your message. Next slide. When we talk about popular press, though, I mean, it's a tertiary source, but a journalist may unintentionally misinterpret scientific data, mistake conclusions, or present it out of context because their editors want a hook, so people will read it. I had an example in one of my consumer health clients. His doctor prescribed him a new drug, which was the third in the class. And in the article he read in a well-known newspaper, it said it had a 50% mortality rate. Well, I'd hesitate to take such a drug myself. He asked me to research it, and when I went back to the original article, and by the way, any good tertiary source will link back to the original source, so you can go back and look at it yourself. The original article reported a 5% mortality rate across all 3 drugs in that class. The patient population was much larger, and I suspect this was just a typo. I don't think there was any malintent there, but you have to be careful. By the way, I sent in this correction to that newspaper, and it is now corrected, so I did my part there. Next slide. And this is just a quick visual about the and, or not when you're using Boolean operators. A lot of us are just using keywords these days, and is usually the default for many of the scientific databases. But just so you know how it plays out in terms of results, number of results. Next slide. Levels of evidence. These systematic reviews obviously are the top. We have our levels of unfiltered information. RCTs are the top of that pyramid, the gold standard for evidence-based. And then the filtered information are the reviews. Background information, expert opinion, their opinions. Then you want to absolutely go to something a little more rigorous before you control, so you can control the message and make sure you have the right information. Next slide. So evidence synthesis, I'm referring to systematic reviews, and I just am throwing this up here because we do have a systematic review service in the health sciences here in Abbott Hall, Abbott Library, and these are links to the guides that we have on this topic, but we can help you conduct any kind of review that you're doing. And we have 3 different levels of service that we offer and help you make it absolutely the best one you can do. This systematic review process, by the way, is another way to reduce bias. And humans always have bias in everything they do. Next slide. So I throw this cartoon in here because I love it in terms of AI. Be careful what you ask for and be careful how you ask the question. Next slide. So I'm just covering this briefly. These are also known as large language models because you're going to get more in depth in this series. But the trick to using AI effectively is in the formulation of the prompt, and that is how you ask the question. We know AI makes stuff up. And you can visit this Purdue guide to see more information about effective prompt design. But the way all of us were introduced to AI a few years ago was that a medical student asked AI to help her with the paper, and she had 3 references that she couldn't verify. 8 librarians spent a whole afternoon trying to do that and failed. We finally went back to the student and said, where did these come from? They came from AI. So I did a little test in BARD, and I went in and I asked it to do a summary, and it gave me these references. And I went back and I said, are these references real? And it said, no, I made them up. And it said, if you're really interested, go to these references. And I said, are those references real? And it said, no, I made them up. So if you understand how AI works, it doesn't summarize information the way a human mind does. All it does is use a probability of what the next word in the line is going to be. That's all it is probability. And that's why it doesn't really know what it's doing in some cases. So just FYI, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that later. Next slide. So I mentioned copyright and fair use. It's really important to understand. In education, a lot of us think that fair use applies no matter what we're doing, but that's really not true. There is a fair use evaluator tool that you can use if you're unsure. If you go to Wikimedia Commons, the Creative Commons license is something that is, you then use it. And I just want to note that the previous cartoon I showed you and the next image I'm going to show you have attribution and are examples of fair use, but they will not be included in the slides that Catherine shares with you, because that is not fair use. That would give you license to share it anywhere you wish, on Facebook or in another online platform. And so we can't do that. Go to the next slide. And I just include this because I love this slide. I just think it's terrific. I love the way it's laid out. I love the little bacteria guys. So, but anyway, this will not be included in your list. Next slide. So that's pretty much what I have to offer. I'm just pointing out that we have an on-call reference service available Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. Chat is available 24/7. Many of us staff chat weekdays 9 to 5, but somebody is always available. And if a question comes in on a Saturday or a Sunday, you're up at 2 a.m., we will answer it for you the next day. Thank you much for your attention.
Let me see if there's any questions in the chats. Christopher says, I would argue that is exceedingly human-like. I think, Christopher, are you talking about the AI? If Christopher can unmute.
Yeah, I had finagled my app permissions to get it to unmute. But yeah, no, that was just a quick joke in response to the analysis on AI making up references and pretending it information. I feel like, honestly, that's troublingly human-esque. Like that'll be a Turing test.
Librarians are squirming in their seats. Very, very good observation, however.
And does anybody else have any questions for Pam or Diane, especially regarding any of your research or misinformation, disinformation? This would be the time to ask, please. And I will email Ellen to see if she's coming on soon. While we're waiting for Ellen, Pam, can you tell us like a couple things that you encounter? What are some issues you encounter when students come to you for assistance in the library, especially related to some of the things that you talked about?
Well, in particular, they often come and ask for evidence-based articles or peer-reviewed articles. Most of the databases that we have all kinds of filters that allow you to reduce your results, because if you're throwing keywords in, you're going to get 1 million results or 100,000 results. And one of the filters we have is peer-reviewed information. And that feeds directly into, the valid journals that are not predatory. And the fact that the evidence or the articles you're getting in that list are reliable, and you don't really have to confirm them anywhere or look further. At least that's the premise. I mean, it's not always true, but the amount of, I'd say 95% of the time it is true. And so that's how this publication cycle works. And by the way, that is true in the scholarly publication cycle on the liberal arts side. The difference is in scientific communication, the title of the article generally tells you what's in the article. In poetry, not so much, because, or you know, other liberal arts, because they're using more, taking advantage of language and metaphors and that kind of thing. But the scientific aspects, I think that makes it easier for students to find what they're looking for and to understand by just looking at the abstract. Another thing we get often is someone will come in with an article from a popular press or a predatory journal and say, can I use this? And then we go through our vetting process. In regard to predatory journals, one thing that is not on the predatory journal list, by the way, is journal titles from a publisher called MDPI. And some of you may have seen that in some of your research. MDPI is a very gray area, just so you know. It's not in the Bell's list, but there is a feeling among many of us that it should be, because many of those journal titles are the example I used. So be careful of MDPI publications.
Great, thank you. So again, we're just waiting for Ellen. Anything else that you encountered, especially when it comes to sources? Do any of the students get confused by the sources and what they should be using when they're doing some of their research or whatnot?
They do. One of the problems we have, particularly with incoming graduate students, is that they are so used to just the online information, they don't really recognize the items in a citation or in a journal article, which just has the abstract, you know, on the screen they're looking for, on the title screen. They don't really know what the journal title is. They don't understand the volumes and the issues and that kind of thing. So we have to educate them about how to vet that and how to, you know, look for those clues. And that goes to misinformation as well, because if they look at the journal title, they should be able to determine if that's a reliable source. They don't quite know how to look for author biographies or author credentials. If you see somebody on a journal title, they're an author and they're at Duke University, you can go to Duke University and you can look them up. Faculty and staff are always listed on websites, usually, for institutions. Let's see, what else? Have I gotten on chat a lot? Well, journal press articles, they often want to use those. And so then I have to walk them through, well, this is a popular press article. Let's go back and look at the original article. And I have to school them in how to, you know, use that information instead. But it's difficult because you know how it is. We're all impatient. If something doesn't appear in 2 seconds, you know, you're ready to move on. So we have to show them the results and say, look, you can't just look at the top 10 results or 10 pages or 10 results on the first page, rather. By the way, I don't know if any of you are using Google Scholar at scholar.google.com, but that is an alternative to something like PubMed. It does have a lot of information in it, and it's pretty reliable. And it does also directly link to full text at UB if you're signed into UB Library's website when you're using it.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to put the survey in the chat at this time, and I'm going to see if Ellen has signed on yet. Great. Okay, let's see. Ellen, are you here yet? She is. Ellen, great. I'm going to turn it over to you now. So let me also make you co-host. Thank you, Ellen. And Diane, do you want to introduce Ellen for us?
My pleasure. Ellen has been a stalwart in accepting our invitation year after year to present to the Scientific Communication Workshop series. And I suggest that you listen very carefully, because Ellen and her team are unsung heroes at UB in their ability to get you connected to valuable outside information sources to help you promote your professional development and career achievements. And she's just a great person to work with. I know from experience, because many years ago, when I had gotten this wonderful grant, nobody knew about it until I contacted Ellen. And then it just took off. So Ellen, I personally thank you and welcome you to this event again.
Thanks, Diane. That's great to hear. Great to be with you. So I do have two colleagues who are supposed to join.
Oh,
And one of them was like tied up with a press conference. Hopefully he'll be here. That's Corey Nealon and also Dave Hill. Hopefully they'll be connecting very soon. Um, so I can just give you part of a sort of overview of the University Communications Office. We do media relations, which means we connect you folks and everything you're doing with the external media. We also publish UB Now. Um, oh, okay. Corey's here. That's great. So the other third, one of the other thirds is here. Um, and okay, so we also publish UB in the News, which is a daily news roundup of all of the most of the things that are in the media that mention UB, either national, international, or local news. So that's sort of a good way to keep up with what's going on, sort of what's being reported on the university outside the university. We also work with an organization called The Conversation, which publishes um, expert sort of articles by experts. Basically, they're trying to get academics to write in simple to understand terms for the general public about topics that are in the news that they are experts on. So that's a great opportunity actually for anybody who might be on the call who has sort of has something to say about something that's in the news, is an expert on it, and the conversations editors work very closely with you to write those articles, and then they get them placed really in major national publications. So that's also a great opportunity. Um, we also kind of wanted to talk about um, some of the things that are happening in the media right now where you might get called. I mean, most of what we want to talk about is why you want to talk to us or the media, but there are some cases where you don't want to talk to the media. Um, I don't know if Corey or Dave wants to talk about that.
Sure, I can jump in. Thanks, Ellen. Hi, everyone. Apologies for being a tad late. Yeah, as Ellen mentioned, Dave, Ellen, and I all work in university communications, and we have a lot of duties throughout the university, and one of those specifically involves responding to media requests. And when those come in, sometimes they'll come directly to our office, and we'll sort of ask around to different communications officers and different doctors and different researchers in the university. But sometimes they come direct to professors, researchers, staff members. And when that occurs, regardless of the inquiry, whether or not it's about something positive or concerning or negative, we always ask that you reach out to us. Typically, your point person there would be Ellen. But if she's not around, she'll have an out of office on, and one of us will gladly respond and take note of it. We only ask that just because, we like to coordinate and make sure that the university is just in the loop and being responsive to the media requests as they come in. Because maintaining these media relationships with media, whether it be local media or national media or anything in between, is, sort of one of the key things that our office does. And this, the request that we ask that, you reach out to us when members of the media do contact you or your colleagues is taken on a bit of increased importance lately. It's no secret that the current administration has been, displeased with the current state of federal funding for medical research for any number of different types of research that the federal government funds, basic science, medical research, you name it. And, it's not that, we just ask that, when if these requests do come in, that, you reach out to us. We can sort of vet these requests. We can figure out if it's a media organization you haven't heard of, we can tell you about them. If it's someone you have, we can sort of help guide you. We provide, what do you call it? Media training as well. So basically, as these requests come in, we just ask that you do reach out to us. And, and it's not to say that, you can't discuss matters related to proposed funding cuts. What we really encourage people to do is to stick to the facts about what they do in their research. If you're a researcher who researches different strains of the flu virus, here are the facts about the flu virus and here are the facts about what it does, but we ask that people generally stay away from partisan politics. That's not an issue. We'll leave that to the political science department. That's more their arena. So, but anyway, that's sort of, an overview on that. I forgot if Ellen, if you're going to talk next about, or if Dave, but
Dave, did
yeah.
you want to talk about crisis communications briefly?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I just hopped on. Did you guys already kind of give an overview of media relations and?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
They started earlier. I think their previous thing finished faster.
Gotcha.
So, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Happy to talk a little bit about crisis and emergency communications. There's actually a slightly separate team within the Division of University Communications that focuses pretty much solely on crisis communications, as well as internal communications. So like Corey was saying, anytime any potential issues arise, our office can certainly assist with whether it's drafting talking points or statements that can be given out to reporters who are sending inquiries. We can certainly assist with all of that. And then as far as kind of the other arm of that is more so the emergency communications side, which would be I'm sure you've all at some point received UB alert. Those generally come out of our office. I would say probably 9.9 out of 10 times. That's coming out of our office with assistance from a variety of other units around campus, depending on what the alert is, whether it's informing the campus community that we're monitoring weather conditions and will provide further guidance if needed, or if there's certain buildings that might be unavailable or offline for a period of time due to anything from gas leaks to small dorm room fires and all that good stuff. So Jared Dahlgren is our assistant. I forget if he's assistant or associate vice president. We'll call him AVP for internal communications, and he works. He kind of oversees the crisis and emergency communications aspects.
Okay, so the sort of the meat of what we want to tell you all is sort of like, why should you bother working with your Office of University Communications? And the short answer is that as a researcher, we believe that you want the world to take note of your work and to know why it's important. And so we can help you do that. So you would come to us with a significant publication that's going to be coming out, or a significant finding that maybe you're presenting. We want to help you get that information out to the media in a way that the general public can understand, that the media will understand. And it gives, it helps on multiple levels. It helps your own reputation, often internally. We will get the news releases that we do get published in UB Now, which is the daily paper here, daily digital publication. And it helps your department's reputation. It helps UB's reputation when we get research published and written about outside of the university. So all of those things are positive. I sort of the highest priority is when you're like a lead author on a sort of significant paper in your field in a high impact journal. doesn't have to always be a high impact journal. There's lots of journals I've never heard of, but if the finding is kind of interesting, we want to know about it and we want to see if we could maybe write something about it. Sometimes sometimes we will do a full news release on it, which involves conversations, interviews, sometimes back and forth several times to change things or make sure things are correct. You would get to review everything that we publish. But even if we don't do a news release, we might end up doing like put something in UB Now, which is a short item, letting people know about it, or sometimes it ends up as a social media post. Or you can also work with the communicator in your school. And I think you're from all over the university, not just the Jacobs School, I think. So whoever your unit communicator is, you should be sort of, connecting with them as well.
And Ellen,
The
can
other,
they also
sorry.
contact you if it's more than just publications, if it's awards, grants, or whatnot? Would that be a good idea as well?
Sure. I think in those cases, sometimes it's better to start with your unit communicator, and then they will probably be the most interested in it. And then if they also think that it's worth sending it on to us or to UB Now, that's also fine. Or you can send to both of us at the same time. We can decide who's going to actually do it.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. The other time that when we work with you is when journalists call us, which is kind of what Corey was talking about before, or someone like, for example, we keep hearing about measles cases, and as far as we know, there's nothing in Erie County. They just sent out an advisory, but there's nothing here. But there is a case, I think, in Ontario, and there's also a couple cases in New York City. So that's like very topical. And you've probably seen Tom Russo and John Selleck have been on local TV talking about it. I think they've even been on some national programs talking about the issue, how quickly it can spread, how deadly it is. Do you need to get a booster or whatever? What if you were never vaccinated? Those kinds of things. So when journalists need somebody to talk about something like that, they call the universities, they call the University of Buffalo, and we try very hard to get them the right person as quickly as possible. That is a time-sensitive issue. And there are some people like for example Tom Russo or Nancy Nielsen who they sort of have this down to a science. Sorry, no pun intended, but they answer like within sometimes minutes. And so not everybody can do that, and we understand that. But if you can, or if you're at sort of like at a period of time when you actually can be super responsive, that is super helpful. Then that means that, the media will love you for that. They will come back for other things. That might even be somebody that we can actually pitch, your own research on your behalf. So that's sort of how we develop relationships with reporters. Local reporters know that, if you need an expert on almost anything, you could probably call the University of Buffalo. We could probably find you that person that you need. So that's why also we may contact you and say, we have a request. She's got a deadline in 4 hours. Could you possibly talk to her? In fact, we just did it. We just did that today. The dean of the School of Nursing spoke to Channel 7 about sort of the ever-present nursing shortage and what is the university doing, what is the state doing in order to try and get more people into nursing. So that was something this woman had. I think she called it 1 o'clock. She had a 4 o'clock deadline, and luckily the dean was available. So that worked out really well. So that's like an example of things going well. Other examples of things going well. Recently there was Nora Linkoff she is in neurology, but she's a neuro-ophthalmologist, which I didn't know what that was. But anyway, she was a co-author on a big study that came out about how some of these new weight loss drugs can actually cause vision problems. And she didn't really want to, we usually like to talk to researchers before the paper comes out. It's completely okay for you to share your papers with us when it's still under embargo, when the story the paper has not been published. She decided, along with her co-authors, they didn't want to do that, but she spoke to me like the day after it was published, and we did a release about it, and we got quite a few sort of national publications and websites that covered it, which was great because there were a whole bunch of people, you know, a whole bunch of authors on that paper. And they talked about I think the top author was from Utah, but they also quoted Dr. Linkoff, which was great, which worked out really well. Things where it doesn't work out so well, I'm trying to think. I know Diane was talking to me about, let's talk about good and bad. I mean, the things that don't work out well, I have to just say, is when you think that if you treat a conversation with a reporter more like a conversation than an interview, you don't ever want to go off the record, because I don't think that exists anymore. People make comments that are sort of like jokey, commenty things that they think, oh, well, they're not going to use that. That's the thing they're going to use. And if it doesn't make you look good, that's not their priority. Their priority is to get something catchy into their story and something that the readers will remember. And so it's not a malicious thing. It's just easier to just kind of always, if you're going to talk to the media, have like 3 or 4 top line things you want to say. And if they ask you a sort of question that comes out of the blue, that seems out of left field, like, oh, they have an agenda. You know, you can say, great question, go back to your 3 points and just reiterate them. And I think that's kind of not a bad thing to follow up on.
Ellen, I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the media training you've done for UV faculty? I know that's been very well received.
Yeah, Dave, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So our colleague, Bert Gambini, who spent a long career with WBFO, the NPR affiliate here in Buffalo and Southern Ontario, leads our media training program, and he's done a ton of these. He does them for he can do them for individuals. So if somebody just happens to kind of have a media interview coming up that has sort of been sprung on them, and you have a day or two's notice, Bert will gladly hop on a Zoom call or phone, and he can give you some pointers and tips. His kind of more ideal way of doing it is through like smaller group kind of sessions. And in those cases, he really he's such a good presenter, and he's got everything down. He has terrific examples of fairly well-known people who have given radio or TV interviews, where they're so good, and they're able to succinctly express kind of what Ellen was saying, like sort of the main points that you want to convey in that story. And he'll go over everything from, if it's a television interview, what articles of clothing to wear, what not to wear, what colors, might clash with a green screen or something like that. And again, he's so good at just offering tips and advice. And I think what Ellen said earlier too about kind of treating everything as if it is on the record is really important, because you definitely, you don't want to say anything that you wouldn't intend for the general public to see or hear in that story. But I can actually I did send a link in the chat with all of our media relations contact people and the schools and units that they're responsible for covering. Bert's contact information is on there, so if anybody wants to get in touch with him to learn more about media training, or even if you're interested in scheduling a media training session, certainly reach out to Bert, and he'd be happy to work with you. And Ellen and Corey and I and pretty much everybody else in media relations can also offer, just kind of quick general advice and tips for talking to the media. But Bert really delivers a nice polished presentation that's usually about 45 minutes to an hour. And like I said, with lots of good examples.
Thank you. That's terrific. Really helpful.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions for anybody on that presented today? Not hearing anything, and there's nothing in chat. I do want to say thank you very much to all our presenters. And Ellen, thank you for you and your cohort for coming in early. We appreciate it. Pam did a spectacular job, but I think she was like, I'm going to skip this slide, which is perfectly fine because it wasn't necessarily something that she had to go into in depth. Thank you very much. That was all very, very important information that was actually nice and succinct. I do want to say to everyone that I did put in chat the 2 PowerPoints. Pam's is in PowerPoint form instead of PDF because she wants you to be able to click on those links when you want to get to the information you're looking for. So please make sure you can have a copy of that. If for some reason you can't get a copy of that from chat, please feel free to email me at cmp9@buffalo.edu, and I'll be happy to send you that as well. And also, if you're interested in microcredential, please contact me. I'll be happy to give you information on it, and you can decide after you read the information whether that is something you're interested in. And I want to say thank you very much, but I'm going to have Diane lead us out. Diane, do you want to do a quick goodbye summary, whatnot, and then maybe plug next week?
It's really very rewarding to see such an excellent turnout. It's really a pleasure for me. Catherine and I have been working on this together for quite a few years now, and some years have been better than others, but this has been an extensive turnout, and we're very pleased. We keep changing the format, we keep changing the invited speakers, and that's a reflection of what we learned from you. So we really welcome you and hope you'll take a few minutes to fill out the survey, give us the feedback, because from that feedback, we build next year's program. It's kind of like this year's strain of the flu vaccine. We always try to improve it and make it more robust, I think is the word. So thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next week at the same time. We have another session coming up. And then I think we're taking a break because of spring break, right?
We are.
We'll see you in Orlando or someplace like that.
Well, we do have 2 excellent panelists next week.
Exciting program.
Yeah, Dr. Kenneth Snyder and Gail Burstein. Yeah. Burstein as well. So good questions to them, and you can come with your questions as well. And I want to thank everyone on. I want to thank obviously Diane and Pam and Ellen, and I think is it Corey and Dave? Is that correct? Excellent. Thank you so much. The information was very valuable, and we thank everyone for your attendance and of course our presenters' stellar job. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you
Hey,
too.
everyone.
Bye-bye.